Good morning, everyone. Today I'm going to talk about this hole that opened up. I think it was the year 2001, but it might have been 2003. I can't exactly remember. It's a hole that opened up just suddenly. And as soon as my parents saw it was there, my father went to have a look at it and he was quite interested. He couldn't see the bottom at all. So he went to measure it. He took a piece of string and he put a stone on the end, the classical way, huh? And he said it was 35 meters deep. So after that, he asked around, and the locals weren't very willing to talk about it because everyone seemed to know, at least families who had been there for several generations, weren't too keen on talking about it. And later we realized why. There's a certain amount of, I'd call it embarrassment, because it's something that their ancestors did, and maybe they're not too proud about it. Although I'm a firm believer that you shouldn't be held responsible for what your ancestors did. So a marnière, what is a marnière? It is a hole. They are holes that were dug. Some of them go back 2,000 years, just for information. Some are as recent as, I might be wrong here, but the last ones I think were dug around maybe the end of the 19th century. I've just checked, and in fact the last one that was recorded dates from 1959. And why were they dug? They were dug because about 40 meters, 35 to 40 meters deep, in Mauraville at least, there is something which is called marl, I think is the English word for it. It's called marne. And this substance is it's sort of chalky looking, very pale, and it's a brilliant fertilizer. And so farmers used to spread it on their fields before they had sprays and all sorts of stuff. They used to put this marne on their fields, and it was lovely, you know, green Normandy, brilliant. But their method was they dug these holes which were about 35 to 40 meters deep, as I said, and once they had finished using or digging out as much substance as they wanted, they tended to just close them up again, the access holes, I mean the entrances to these galleries. They made big galleries under the earth. The way they should have dug out these galleries was to leave columns which were at least the same width as the amount of marl that they had scraped out and brought back to the surface. And that was a bit of a bother, so I think a lot of marnières ended up with very thin columns and then huge great spaces around, because of course they took as much as they could. So rules were not followed very strictly, let's say. And once they'd finished with these, because that's where I was getting, I don't know how deep they closed off these entrances, but it might have been, I don't know, 2 or 3 or 4 meters deep. They put wooden planks to shut it off. Then they shoveled earth on top, and that was it. So I've been told. In fact, sometimes they planted a tree there just to mark the spot. But the result is that years later, decades later, sometimes centuries later, on a very rainy spring day, when the earth is completely saturated with water, plus around Mauraville and a number of other villages, it's a very clay sort of earth. So it's extremely heavy, and suddenly these holes form. Suddenly the earth falls through, because what happens to wood planks, after a while they rot. I may be stating the obvious here, but and so there was a real danger to this whole enterprise. And when our hole fell through, we got someone to come and have a look at it. My father got someone to have a look at it, and he said, "Oh yes, it's a marnière," because at first my father didn't have a clue what it was. He just thought, "Oh, that's dangerous." So he asked this guy, Monsieur Marnières, he called him, to come along. I can't remember his real name, and he explained the whole caboodle to us. And yeah, we were rather surprised. And my father was told, "Yes, I'm not at all surprised it's fallen through. At the moment, there are several hundreds, several thousands all across Normandy falling through every day." And our jaw hit the floor. We were absolutely aghast. And he said, oh, I wouldn't worry about it. And he went to have a look at the house as well. And he said, oh, there were no cracks anyway. Your house is fine. And the pigeon tower is fine. And this was, what, 20 plus years ago? There's nothing wrong with the house. There are no cracks. Still no cracks to be seen, either on the chateau or on the pigeon tower or even on the little house. Everything's fine. I just felt I had to say that. But there were accidents. There have been, over the years, a number of people who have fallen into these holes. Either they were driving along in Moraville. In fact, there was one hole which opened up. It swallowed the entire road. It was a very small, tarred road. And people were driving back to their house. And the hole just swallowed the car. And the woman who was driving managed to climb out of this hole by opening her car window and pulling herself up by the roots of the tree, which was just next to the hole. I've had to shut the shutters a bit. It was getting too light in here. Another young man heard a thud outside his front door late at night, and he opened the front door. It was dark outside. He put one foot out and he fell into this enormous hole, and he was swallowed up. So these things are pretty dangerous. My father did a bit of research, and during his research he found out that because these holes were considered pretty dangerous, the state started to regulate them, and the digging of them in particular. So people started digging them illegally without any authorization of any sort. And apparently they started digging them, one favoured place was just behind their hedge so that no one could have a look in. They let their hedge grow nice and high, and no one ever knew about them, except that at some point people realized that that's what was happening a lot. And apparently that's when Napoleon decided to start putting police on horseback. And he said, okay, on horseback they will be able to look over the top of hedges to see who's digging these holes illegally. Apparently that's how it started. So fun fact. And when I say police on horseback, I mean gendarmes, because in France, for those who don't know it, there is a difference between police and gendarmerie. One is state and the other is army. So it's the gendarmes on horseback who were put into place by Napoleon. And this was in 1853, I believe. But as you can imagine, there was a certain amount of worry concerning the house and its structural integrity, let's say. Not just the house, but the two outbuildings as well. And the question here is really, when were these holes dug? Because in the fields just beyond the house, you can see that there were galleries that have been dug out back then, because the land it's pretty flat all around Moraville, fairly straight surfaces, and there are sort of dips in it, you know, so you can see there are galleries 35 meters deep. And the reason that people were asked to leave columns that are thick enough was obviously to make sure that the stability was guaranteed, the stability of the earth above. The house was built on a piece of land which seems to be absolutely straight. There are no dips in that area, so that just confirms what Monsieur Marnières told my father, that there was no danger for the house, which is not the case for several other houses we know of. So how did you get down there? Well, they built a hole which went just straight down, which was, I don't know, about 2 meters diameter. And they built a little construction whereby you let someone down in a sort of wooden bucket with a chain, and they went and collected the marl, and then they went back up. But just imagine that they dug by hand holes all over Normandy, and further even than that were 40 meters deep. I have to say, people weren't lazy. Anyway, and there are many places all over the north of France with the word Marne inside them, like Marne-la-Vallée or Seine-et-Marne. So it's not just limited to Normandy. And companies who are digging a pathway for motorways when there's a motorway in construction, like, these companies were really used to stumbling across these holes, because every few meters they found one. So they had their diggers digging away at this pathway, and I think they were very, very careful because they scratched a bit of the surface, and if they saw a circle shape that appeared, which was a slightly different color from the rest, they knew, okay, this is a marnière, we have to be careful now. So they dug out the hole completely, and then they filled it. These marnières are, for the most part, filled, but there is at least one that you can visit. I haven't yet been to see it, but I would be really interested in going. It's quite a fascinating chapter of Norman history. And if one of these entrance holes fell through in the middle of a big field, I swear, I was walking around just after these holes started opening. I was walking around not far from here, also in Moraville, and in a big cultivated field, I saw one that had opened up, and it was, I'm not joking, I have to think. The entrance is only, like I said, about the size of a person, you know, huddled up a bit, and if there's nothing around this hole to contain the surroundings, it's everything is pulled in, and it looked like an enormous crater. It was absolutely terrifying. It was about 30-40 meters across. It was absolutely terrifying, and after that I didn't really dare go out much because it continued to rain for some time, and I thought, crikey, you know, if I'm swallowed up by one of these things, no one will ever find me. But yeah, we survived this huge ordeal. We're all still here, and we just have 2 to 3 of them on our land, which is not hugely reassuring. However, the house is structurally absolutely perfect. Years after this happened, I realized that I had encountered the word marnière before. In school, when I was about 12 years old, we'd studied a short story by a very famous Norman author called Guy de Maupassant, who wrote very realistic stories about Normans, very accurate and quite depressing sometimes. And this story was about a Norman woman who lived in the countryside, as far as I remember. The story was called Pierrot. This woman, I think she's called Madame Lefebvre, decides to get herself a dog. She gets one from her neighbor, and she realizes after a while, because she's quite stingy. She's actually quite rich, and she decides the dog costs too much. So she goes and she throws, and this happened quite a lot. She throws this poor little dog into a marnière. Back then I hadn't wondered at all what it was. I just thought, oh, it's some sort of hole in the ground, but I didn't know it was a real feature of Normandy back then. She throws this dog into the marnière after a couple of days, when she hears it, you know, crying, and she realizes, oh, poor dog, I should go and feed it. And she starts throwing food down into the hole. And then she hears an awful lot of dogs fighting for the food, and she realizes, oh, there are a number of dogs down there. And in fact, Normans did throw anything unwanted, they threw into marnière, because it was a big hole. You can throw in carcasses, anything you didn't fancy keeping. And so they did, including dogs. So anyway, she decides she can't feed all these dogs. At the end of the day, basically, she abandons the dog, who starves to death. It's accurate. Now, I don't think I've mentioned this yet, but we have a second entrance, literally a few meters from the first, because that wasn't uncommon. They just went and built another hole not far from the first gallery to start a second one. and we know it is one because it's exactly round, it's exactly the same dimensions as the first one, and we know that we have a couple at least on our land. And my dream would be to open this up. It's not secured, but I might just do that. Put up some red and white tape, and it's held together between 2 of our limes. It's held together by the roots, basically, because it's already got I don't know, a bit of a dip in. Let's say it's gone down that much already, and it's been like that stable for several years. What I would love to do is get a team of professionals out there, guys who know their job, who have the right equipment, for them to create this hole, make sure it's completely open, stabilize it, and then, but this is one of my crazy big dreams, have our patrons coming and being able to visit the gallery. That would be a first. among Patreons, I think. Do you like the idea? I think it sounds really cool. Tell me what you think. I'd have to find out, in fact, what it costs to open one of these Marnières and make it suited for visitors. But yeah, tell me in the comments what you think.